The garage door was still broken when I pulled into the driveway. I'd been meaning to fix it for 3 months, and somehow that detail, that stupid, ordinary detail, was the first thing I noticed when I came home from burying my father. My name is Caleb Reeves. I'm 32 years old. I work in commercial insurance, I drive a used Accord, and I have spent the last 4 years being quietly, steadily loved by a woman I thought I would marry. Her name was Danielle. I say was because of what happened next, because of what I heard before I even made it through my own front door. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My father passed on a Tuesday. Lung cancer, caught late, moved fast. He was 61 years old, the kind of man who woke up at 5 every morning, not because he had to but because he genuinely liked watching the sun come up. He was a civil engineer who had spent 30 years quietly building things, bridges, drainage systems, the kind of infrastructure nobody thinks about until it's gone. He was also, as it turned out, a man who had been quietly building something else the entire time I was growing up. Something he never told me about. Something he left inside, a plain gray envelope tucked behind the photograph on his office wall. The one of him and me fishing at Raystown Lake when I was 7 years old, both of us squinting into the sun. The attorney handed it to me after the service. A woman named Patricia Shields, efficient and kind, who had apparently known my father for over a decade without my ever hearing her name once. She said he'd been updating the documents every year. That he was thorough. That I should read everything carefully and not make any decisions for at least 48 hours. She slid a business card across the table, told me to call her with questions, and then gave me the kind of look that said she already knew what was inside that envelope and was sorry in advance for what it was going to feel like. I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat. I didn't open it in the parking lot because I wasn't ready. I stopped at the gas station on Route 22 and sat there for 20 minutes watching people fill their tanks and go about their days, and I thought about how the world just keeps moving even when yours has stopped completely. Then I drove the rest of the way home. That's when I heard it. I came up the front walk with the envelope in my hand and my tie loosened around my neck, and the living room window was cracked open the way Danielle always left it when she was home because she said she liked the cross breeze. I could hear her voice before I reached the porch steps. She wasn't talking to me. She wasn't talking to a friend. I recognized the cadence immediately, that lower register she used when she thought no one was listening, that particular tone she only ever used with one other person. Her brother, Marcus. I stopped on the second step. I don't know why I didn't just walk in. Something about the way she said the word finally made my hand freeze on the railing. It's just now that Caleb's dad is finally gone, she was saying. We actually have a real window here. Marcus, listen to me. He's going to be vulnerable for the next few months. He won't be thinking straight. That's exactly when we move. I stood there in my funeral suit on my own front porch and did not breathe. Her brother said something I couldn't fully make out. Then she laughed, not her real laugh, the one that crinkled her eyes and made her snort when something caught her off guard. This was the other one. The one that meant she was being practical. The house alone is worth asking about, she said. And Caleb doesn't know what else is in the will yet. We need him to feel supported right now. We need him talking. The second he tells me what he's inherited, we'll know how fast to move on the engagement. Engagement. I had a ring. I want you to know that. I had a ring in a velvet box in the back of my sock drawer that I had been carrying around for 6 weeks trying to figure out the right moment. A sapphire, because she'd once mentioned offhandedly that she thought diamonds were overdone. I had thought about that comment for 2 years before I bought the ring. I took one step back down the front porch stairs. Then another. I walked back to my car, got in, and sat there in the driveway for a long moment. The garage door hung at its broken angle. I stared at it. Then I drove away. I went to the only place that felt right. My father's house. He had left me a key years ago, an old brass one on a plain ring that I'd kept on my keychain so long the edges had smoothed out. The house was a 2-story colonial in a quiet neighborhood in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and it smelled like him when I walked in, like sawdust and that particular brand of dish soap he'd used my entire life. I sat down at his kitchen table and finally opened the envelope. I read it 3 times. My father, in his quiet and methodical way, had spent 3 decades doing what he did best, building. He owned the house outright. That was the part I knew. What I did not know was that he also owned a warehouse property in eastern Pennsylvania that he had been leasing to a manufacturing company for 11 years, generating income. He had folded into a brokerage account I had never once heard him mention. The account balance, as of the last statement, was $420,000. There was also a savings bond ladder, a small parcel of land in the Poconos that had belonged to his grandfather, and a life insurance policy that named me as the sole beneficiary. Sole, only me. There was also a letter. Handwritten, 3 pages in his careful engineer's print that I had read on birthday cards and grocery lists my entire life. Caleb, If you're reading this, then I didn't get the chance to tell you any of this in person. Which means I waited too long and I'm sorry for that. There are things a father should say out loud that I kept on paper instead. This is one of them. I want you to know that I did my homework. I know that sounds strange. But you are my son, and when I got sick, I started paying attention to everything around you the way I wish I had paid attention earlier. I hired someone to look into Danielle Marsh about 8 months ago. I don't expect you to thank me for it. I expect you to be angry. But I need you to read what I found before you decide how angry to be. She has a pattern, son. 3 relationships before you, each one ending after she had extracted what she came for. 1 man lost a car. 1 lost a business investment. The 3rd lost his savings and moved out of state. The investigator documented all of it. The report is in the gray accordion folder behind my desk, bottom shelf, behind the tax binders. I'm not telling you who to love. I'm telling you what I saw. I'm leaving you everything I built because you are the only person I trust to do something good with it. Don't let anyone take it from you because you were too kind to believe they would try. Love, Dad. I sat at that kitchen table for a very long time. I did not cry again, which surprised me. I think I had moved past the kind of grief that comes out through your eyes and into the kind that settles somewhere lower, somewhere in your chest, where it just sits quiet and heavy like ballast. I got up, found the accordion folder exactly where he said it would be, and I read the investigator's report from the first page to the last. It was worse than the letter suggested. At 11 o'clock that night, I called a college friend who had gone into family law. His name was Trevor, and he answered on the 3rd ring with the slightly wary tone of someone who has learned that late-night calls from old friends usually mean someone is in trouble. I need to ask you something, I said. Okay, he said. If someone inherits property, a house, financial accounts, land while they're in a long-term relationship but not married, does the partner have any legal claim? There was a pause. Generally, no, he said carefully. Inherited assets are separate property. As long as you don't commingle them, don't add her name to accounts, don't use inherited funds to pay joint expenses in ways that blur the line, she has no claim. Are you okay? Not really, I said. Can we talk tomorrow? I'll clear my morning, he said. I slept in my father's guest room that night. I didn't text Danielle. I didn't call. My phone showed 42 notifications by midnight and I turned it face down on the nightstand and listened to the house settle around me and thought about a 7-year-old boy squinting into the sun at Raystown Lake. In the morning, I drove to the Poconos parcel before I did anything else. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I wanted to stand on something my father had owned before I made any decisions about what to do with it. It was about 40 acres off a 2-lane road, mostly wooded, with a creek that cut through the eastern edge. There was a small clearing near the center where someone had once started building a structure. The concrete foundation was still there, overtaken by moss and decades of leaves. I walked the perimeter. It took about an hour. The air smelled like pine and cold water and something I couldn't name, but that felt like the opposite of everything I had felt standing on my front porch the evening before. A neighbor who owned the adjacent property came over while I was there, an older man named Gerald who had known my grandfather and had apparently been keeping an informal eye on the parcel for years out of nothing but habit. Goodwill. He shook my hand and said he was sorry about my father. He told me the land had good bones. He said that phrase twice, the way people do when they mean something more than the words. Good bones, I said. Whatever you do with it. He said, it'll hold. I drove back to Allentown and met Trevor at a coffee shop near his office. I brought the investigator's report. I brought my father's letter. I laid it all on the table and watched him read. He was quiet for a long time after he finished. Caleb, he said finally. I know, I said. You need to do a few things very carefully and in the right order, he said. He pulled out a legal pad. First, do not go back to that house until we've talked through everything. Second, do not discuss the estate with her or her family under any circumstances. Third, we need to review every account you have and identify any commingling risk immediately. Fourth, he paused. Do you still want to be with this person? I thought about the ring in the sock drawer. I thought about the laugh I had heard on the porch. I thought about my father hiring someone to protect me from a distance because he didn't know how to say out loud what he had seen. No, I said. I don't. Okay, Trevor said, and clicked his pen. Then let's talk about how you do this right. Over the next 3 days, I did not go home. I stayed at my father's house and worked through every financial document Trevor and I could find. We identified the accounts, confirmed the separation of assets, documented the estate transfer, and drafted a letter to the warehouse properties leasing company, notifying them of the ownership change. I also called Patricia Shields and told her I was ready to move forward. She said my father would have appreciated the efficiency. I almost laughed. On day 3, Danielle stopped leaving voicemails and started texting in long paragraphs. The first few were worried sounding. Then they shifted. By the third day, her tone had changed in a way I recognized not from our relationship but from the investigator's report, from the descriptions of the other men. She had moved on from once she realized things were not going the way she planned. I know you're going through something heavy right now. I want to be there for you. Can you just tell me where you are? We need to talk about our future. Our future. I stared at the words. I thought about the ring. Then I went to my father's desk and found a fresh sheet of paper and wrote down exactly what I needed to say, not because I thought I would forget it, but because I had learned from somewhere from watching a man spend his life being precise about the things that mattered that some conversations deserve preparation. I drove back to the house on a Thursday afternoon. The garage door was still broken. I noticed it again and felt something settle in me like a decision. She was sitting on the couch when I walked in, and the relief that crossed her face when she saw me looked real enough that for just a moment I felt the pull of 4 years. 4 years of Sunday mornings and shared grocery lists and the particular comfort of a person who knows how you take your coffee. I let myself feel it for exactly that long. Then I sat down in the chair across from her, not next to her, and I put my hands on my knees. I need to tell you some things, I said. Caleb, I've been so. Please let me finish, I said. Not angry. Just clear. I came home from my father's funeral 3 days ago. I came up the front walk and your window was open and I heard you talking to your brother. She went very still. I heard everything, I said. About the window. About waiting until I was vulnerable. About the engagement and moving fast once you knew what I'd inherited. She opened her mouth. I watched her calculate. I had seen that calculation before. I realized I had just never known what I was looking at. Caleb, that's not. I also had a conversation with an attorney, I said. And I want you to know that inherited property is separate property under Pennsylvania law. My father's house, the financial accounts, the land in the Poconos, the warehouse, none of it is marital property, and we aren't married. You have no legal claim to any of it. I want to be clear about that because I know it matters to you. She stood up. The performance changed. I watched it shift from wounded to something colder. You have no idea what you're talking about, she said. I love you. I have been here for 4 years. I found the investigator's report, I said. Silence. My father hired someone about 8 months ago, I said. I've read it. All of it. Andrew Kellner in Cleveland. The investment he made that disappeared when you left. The car, Tom Grady, who moved to Phoenix. I paused. I'm not angry at you. I want you to know that. I'm just done. She stood there in the living room of the house I rented, in the space we had shared for 2 years, and I watched her face do something complicated that I will not try to name. Then she picked up her jacket from the arm of the couch. You're making a mistake, she said. Maybe, I said. But it's mine to make. She left without another word. Her brother came with a truck 2 days later when I was at Trevor's office, and by the time I returned the apartment was half empty in the way that makes a space feel both lighter and strange. I stood in the middle of the living room for a while. Then I went to my sock drawer and took out the velvet box and drove to a jeweler on 5th Street who gave me $600 for the sapphire ring without asking any questions, which I appreciated. I used the money to buy lumber. It took me 2 weekends to fix the garage door, the spring mechanism, the track alignment, the door seal along the bottom that had been letting cold air in all winter. I did it myself, the way my father would have done it, with a YouTube tutorial and 3 trips to the hardware store and the particular satisfaction of fixing something with your own hands. While I worked, I thought about the land in the Poconos. Gerald had called me twice since my visit, not to pressure me about anything, just to share information, the zoning history, the water table data his neighbor had collected years ago, the fact that the creek was clean and the soil along the clearing was good. He seemed to enjoy talking about the land the way people enjoy talking about something they have loved for a long time from a careful distance. I drove back up there on a Saturday morning in October when the leaves had turned and the creek was running high from a week of rain. I walked the clearing again and stood on my grandfather's concrete foundation and thought about what my father had said in his letter. Do something good with it. I called Trevor that evening. Walk me through what it would take, I said. To deed a portion of land to a nonprofit. He was quiet for a moment. Depends on the nonprofit, he said. What are you thinking? I had been thinking about it for weeks without quite naming it to myself until that moment. I told him about my father. About the way he had spent his life building infrastructure, the behind-the-scenes work, the stuff nobody sees. I told him there was a veterans mentorship organization in eastern Pennsylvania that he had donated to every year for as long as I could remember, quietly, the way he did most things. I told him I thought the clearing might be a good place for something. A retreat space, maybe. Somewhere people could go when the world felt like it needed to be smaller for a while. I think your dad would like that, Trevor said. I think so too, I said. The legal process took about 4 months. I kept the house and the financial accounts as my father had intended, and I worked with Patricia Shields and the Veterans Organization to structure the land transfer in a way that made sense for both parties. They sent an architect out to the clearing in November who walked the foundation and said the bones were good. I almost called Gerald to tell him. The warehouse lease renewed in December. I hired a property manager to handle it, an older woman named Diane who had been in commercial real estate for 30 years and who told me in our first meeting that she didn't take clients who micromanaged and that she assumed I was not one of those. I told her she was correct. We got along well. I did not hear from Danielle again. Her brother sent one text, 3 weeks after she moved out, that said only, "You'll regret this." I read it once, then deleted it. I did not spend much time thinking about whether he was right. I had spent enough of my life measuring myself against other people's predictions. What I thought about instead, in the months that followed, was my father sitting at his kitchen table at 5 in the morning watching the sun come up. What he had been thinking about all those years. What he had been building and why and for whom. I thought about the fact that he had never told me about any of it, not to impress me, not to hold it over me, just because it wasn't done yet, and he didn't talk about things that weren't done yet. I understood that now in a way I hadn't when he was alive. I understood it in my own hands when I was fixing the garage door. I understood it when I stood on the concrete foundation in the clearing and felt the solidness of it under my feet, 60 years old and still holding. In February I drove to Racetown Lake. I hadn't been back since I was a kid. It was cold and the water was gray and there were no other cars in the lot when I pulled in. I walked down to the bank where my father and I used to fish, and I stood there for a long time watching the water and not doing anything in particular. I had brought the photo from his office wall, the one of the two of us squinting into the sun, and I held it in my hands and looked at it and then looked at the lake and tried to find something to say. I didn't find words. I didn't need them. The thing about grief that nobody tells you is that it doesn't end on a schedule. It doesn't resolve like a story. It just becomes something you carry differently over time, not lighter, exactly, but more familiar. You learn the weight of it. You stop being surprised by the moments when it catches you, the gas station on Route 22, the smell of dish soap, the particular slant of morning light that looks like 5 a.m. through someone else's kitchen window. What I know now is this: my father watched me from a distance for a long time and loved me in the quiet, structural way of a man who expresses care through preparation. He didn't call me every day. He didn't tell me what he had built. He just built it, and he documented it carefully, and he left me a letter that told the truth about what he had seen. He also left me the photograph. The fishing trip. The 7-year-old with squinting eyes. I had it reframed and hung it in my own house. The rented apartment I had cleared out and made mine again, the place where I fixed the garage door and learned to fill the empty space with something that was actually mine. The land in the Poconos broke ground in the spring. Gerald came to the small ceremony they held at the clearing. He shook my hand and looked at the site plan and nodded slowly, the way people do when something confirms what they already believed. "Good bones," he said. "Good bones," I agreed. I stayed until the afternoon. On the drive home I stopped at a diner off the interstate that reminded me of nowhere in particular, just a diner, just a booth, just coffee in a ceramic mug and the sound of other people living their lives around me. I pulled out my phone and looked at the photograph I had taken of the clearing that morning, the old foundation, the new surveyor's stakes, the creek glinting in the background, and I thought about how different a thing looks when it belongs to you honestly. Not given out of guilt. Not taken out of opportunity. Earned, in the way my father had always said things were earned, by showing up, by being the kind of person who deserves to be trusted with something. I finished my coffee. I left a good tip. I drove home on solid roads, some of which, for all I knew, my father had helped build. The garage door opened on the first try.